Do you want to know what the worst part of being able to play the Nintendo Switch 2 is? It's the fact that I'm going to have to wait nearly 2 months to be able to play it again. And it's going to be such a long 2 months. Now, as of yesterday, the Nintendo Switch 2 finally touched down in the UK. And after hearing that I wasn't lucky enough to win a lottery ticket, Nintendo decided to invite me down anyway. And after spending 4 hours playing as many games as humanly possible, today I'm going to tell you why the Nintendo Switch 2 absolutely blew me away. Now, I've personally never been to one of these events before, so I had no idea what to expect. But essentially what it turned out being was a giant room filled with a bunch of different games that you could walk over and play. Some of which you got to play on a 4K TV, and others you got to play in handheld mode. Now, my biggest worry when it came to the Nintendo Switch 2 was the way the Joy-Cons attached, as I, like many people, were a little bit worried that they were going to be a bit too easy to snap off. But this thing is honestly surprisingly sturdy. The Joy-Cons were really easy to detach and then attach again, and the way it works is you press this lever at the back and this kind of pushes the Joy-Con out, and then you can pull it the rest of the way to completely detach it. Now, the Joy-Cons did bend on this a little bit more than I was expecting, but that did seem to be unique to this dummy unit, and I think it's because literally everyone who was trying it out was wiggling it to see how much give there was. So this unit essentially had years worth of wear and tear done to it in a single event, as everyone was trying to rip them off. I was also surprised by how easily the Joy-Cons attached onto the Switch. The magnets are actually surprisingly strong, which meant it was really easy to get them in the right place. Now, I'm not a huge fan of the kickstand, although it was stronger than I thought it was gonna be. It is still very flimsy, and I have no idea why they decided to go with this as opposed to the version that's on the OLED. That still seems better in my opinion. And I actually found the size of the Switch 2 to be just about perfect. I was a little worried when they said it was gonna be larger than the Switch, because I find the Steam Deck personally to be a little bit too big, but this turned out to be a really happy middle ground. And that goes for the weight too. I found it really comfortable to hold, although I'll definitely be buying a grip as one of my first purchases. But even standing up and playing it in my hands felt really comfortable, so I can definitely see myself having long play sessions in handheld mode. Now, as the Switch 2 is bigger, this also means that the Joy-Cons are larger as well. And despite the fact that I have pretty small hands, this actually made them way more comfortable to hold. One thing that actually made a noticeable difference when I played though was actually the Joy-Con sticks. The fact that they were ever so slightly larger on the Switch 2 just made it a little bit easier to play in handheld mode. The thing that surprised me the most about the Switch 2 though has to be the screen. Now, I absolutely love my OLED, and I was a little bit worried when they announced that this was an LCD screen that it would feel like a noticeable downgrade, but that didn't seem to be the case whatsoever. And for me personally, I found the colors to be just as vibrant as they were on the OLED. And if anything, the higher resolution of the Switch 2 actually means that this screen felt and looked a little bit nicer than the Switch's. But this event wasn't just about showing off the Switch 2, it was also about showing off their game library as well. And the first game I got my hands on was Mario Kart Worlds. Now, Mario Kart Worlds really shakes up what it means to be a Mario Kart game, as not only can you now race with up to 24 people, even in person, there's also new racing modes, new items, new mechanics like the ability to boost when driving down a straight, and also the ability to glide on rails. And alongside there being a ton of new maps, there's also weather and time of day being added to each map as well. Now, it is worth noting that basically every single game we played at this event was the demo version, so I wasn't able to go into menus or look at anything like that. What I got to play was exactly what Nintendo wanted to show us. Now, the first part of gameplay they had us do was not actually a Grand Prix, but instead the journey between two of the Grand Prix races, which is a brand new thing that they've added into this Mario Kart. Now, I love this edition for a few reasons, because not only are there unique items that you can pick up while driving in this mode, there's also the fact that this kind of takes place in the real world, so there'll be cars and different things driving around you, making this a lot more chaotic than the actual races themselves. And of course, you're against 23 other people, so there's already a lot more things going on around you. Now, although this mode was fun, this was not my favorite part of Mario Kart we got to play, as they also let us play the 24-person knockout game. Now, the way this works is there's different checkpoints layered across the map, and at each checkpoint, the bottom 4 drivers will be eliminated. So it's your job to try and stay high enough up that you don't get knocked out. This mode had my adrenaline absolutely going, as being hit in this mode took me from being in like 1st or 2nd and knocked me all the way down to 20th position. And this meant that you always had to be ready for the worst, as at any point you could go from being safe to being in danger. This honestly might wind up being the mode I play the most. It was carnage and it was hilarious. And obviously, I had to play as the cow because the cow is the best character. Now, the one thing that wasn't clear was how you unlock things like new characters, new outfits, and also new karts. We did wind up finding out that you could find new outfits as you were driving around, which is pretty cool, but we didn't manage to unlock any characters or karts, although there were a ton of characters compared to Mario Kart 8 Deluxe. Although obviously everyone's just going to choose the cow. Now, these demos did not include the open world mechanic whatsoever. They're definitely waiting until the Nintendo Direct to give us a little bit more information about it. And we'll hopefully find out why Nintendo seem weirdly confident about the $80 price tag, as they are definitely hiding some information from us. Now, the next game I wound up playing was Donkey Kong Bonanza. Now, this really didn't grab my attention all that much in the Nintendo Direct, as even though it looked fun, I wasn't really sure it was a game for me. And when the Direct finished, it didn't necessarily wind up being high on my list of games I was excited to play. But I am so glad I got to play it in person, because it's completely changed my mind about the entire game. I'd say the game that this is most like isn't actually any of the previous Donkey Kong games. This feels like the successor to Mario Odyssey. And out of every single game I got to play throughout the entire event, this to me had to be the most beautiful. The details in this were spectacular, and my footage most definitely doesn't do it justice, but I fell in love with the details, not only with what you could see when you were looking out from the world, but also the small things, like when Donkey Kong went into water, you could visibly see the fact that his fur was wet. And this was described by the Nintendo employee as being an open worlds game. So whilst you can't necessarily run wherever you want, you could within each of the levels. And in this, you're not even limited by the ground itself, because one of the core gameplay mechanics is Donkey Kong's ability to dig. He can essentially punch through the ground and make his own paths to just about anywhere. Now, there are obviously some limitations to this. There is a hard bedrock on the bottom that you can't go past. But other than that, you can pick up, throw rocks, and dig just about everywhere. And if you're a completionist, then you are most definitely gonna want to do that, because there are so many hidden collectibles around each of the maps, and even characters for you to find. Now, their kind of equivalent to moonstones are these giant bananas, and I think this is going to be like the main currency or the main way to progress in this game. Now, this isn't a launch game. I believe it's coming out in July, so they do have a little bit of time to tweak this, but I think for me the biggest downside was the camera. If you moved in a direction on the map, the camera would automatically move with you, and this was actually quite fast and quite aggressive. And unfortunately, because this was a demo build, we weren't allowed to access like the menu to see if there was any ability to change this, but hopefully that is something they do at launch. The next game I had to play was Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom. Now, it's clear they've spent a lot of time on this port, as it looked absolutely spectacular on the Switch too. This also played incredibly well in handheld mode. The colors were bright and vibrant, and the game itself ran really smoothly. Again, looking just as good, if not better, than my OLED ran Breath of the Wild. The one thing I couldn't test, which I was really sad about though, were the speakers, as it was just too loud to hear a thing in that hall. Now, if you watched the Nintendo Direct, you'd know that one of the biggest things they talked about was the performance upgrade and also the loading speed times. And one of the best ways I thought to show this off is to go into the Korok Forest in Breath of the Wild, where there was not a single frame in sight. And this is the way it was truly meant to be experienced, not the framey mess that ended up on the Switch. And especially now we know it either costs $9.99 or it comes free if you have a Nintendo Switch Online Plus Expansion Pass, that this is essentially going to become a must-play for anyone who loved Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom, as this truly is the best way to experience it. Now, when we were playing Breath of the Wild, they also let us play with the brand new Pro Controller. Now, when I heard that Nintendo were releasing a brand new one, I was kind of split on how to feel, because this one right here is one of my favorite controllers of all time. It's how I play almost all of my games, and I really wasn't sure I needed to upgrade. Now, they've changed a few things up about the new controller. Not only does it have a brand new soft matte feel to it, it also has these new addition of back buttons. And these are buttons that you're going to be able to map yourself to be whatever you want it to be. And if you're new to playing games with back buttons, then whilst at first they might feel a little bit annoying and you might accidentally hit them, although admittedly the way they do it on the Pro Controller makes it a lot harder to accidentally press them than something like this controller. But once you get used to using them, they can become really useful. The next game I then went to play was Metroid Prime 4. Now, this was not only my first ever Metroid game, but also my first real try at the mouse controls. And whilst this looked good, I thought it didn't look quite as impressive as the likes of Donkey Kong. I think the impressive part for this was maybe the fact that it was running at 120 FPS. Now, Metroid does give you the option to play with either the controller or play with a mouse, so obviously I picked the mouse for this one. Now, I'm going to be honest, the mouse mode felt a little bit awkward. It essentially makes you take the Joy-Con, which is a little bit bigger than the Switch one, obviously, and makes you hold it like this. Now, the main issue I actually had was my fingers, because when you're resting on the table, you kind of had to scrunch them up a bit so that they wouldn't hit the table and run along it, especially with my fake nails. And this wound up being not an incredibly comfortable position to be in. So I do think one of the first Switch 2 accessories that is going to come out is going to be a specialized grip to make mouse mode feel a little bit more comfortable. Now, as you can see, I was not the best at using mouse mode. It needed really subtle and small movements to make a big change on the screen, and it took a little bit of getting used to. But one thing that did help was the fact that there was an auto lock function. Because essentially, if you press this button, it would lock on to the nearest enemy straight away for you. But as nice as this is, I do hope it's something we can toggle on and off, because I know not everyone is going to love that ability. Now, whilst a lot of the gameplay mechanics was a lot of shooting, there were a few things that surprised me, because in amongst the fighting were a couple of puzzles. Some that needed you to roll into a ball to solve, and others involved you shooting in certain patterns. This isn't my typical style of game, but it was cool to get a chance at playing it, especially with the mouse mechanics. I am excited to see what other games do with the mouse features though, especially some of the more management focused games like 2 Point Museum, because those I think really benefit from mouse controls versus a controller. I just hope something is released to make it more comfortable to hold. Next up, we have Switch 2 Tour. Now, this is essentially an ad for the Switch 2, as it teaches you all about the functions and its capabilities. And these mini games were a little bit odd. It isn't really a game. It feels more like a literal tech demo, with games that kind of show off the mouse mechanics. There's other games that show off the HD rumble. I even saw one person playing a game that tried to get you to tell the difference between 60 FPS and 120. This would have been fine as a free edition with the Switch 2, but the fact that it's paid is absolutely ridiculous, and I do not recommend paying for this whatsoever. I then got to play the brand new Kirby and the Forgotten Land DLC. Now, annoyingly, we still have no idea what the upgrade price is going to be. I'm hoping this will be around the same as Breath of the Wild, but the fact that they haven't mentioned it whatsoever makes me think that maybe not. Now, if you're wondering what this is, it's essentially a new way of playing every single main level, with it unlocking new paths, new mouthful modes, and new enemies for you to take on and tackle. And even though it's not clear how many hours you're going to get out of this exactly, it does seem like a sizable add-on for DLC. Now, this again is absolutely gorgeous, even though my footage for this one came out a little bit funky. So here's some trailer footage to really sell you on how good this looks. This for me personally was one of my favorite Switch games, so I know I'm going to buy this the day it comes out. And I'm just honestly glad that one of my favorite games got a little bit extra love. Next up, I got to play Drag X Drive. Now, I really love the idea of this game, but the reality is that after a 20-minute demo, literally everyone I spoke to came out complaining that their arms hurt. So this is going to be a game best enjoyed in short bursts, I think. Now, this sees you use the mouse controls to wheel the wheelchair and steer it. And I've got to say, the mechanics were really fluid. I was really surprised by just how much they could pick up. The mouse was incredibly responsive, and I even tried using it on my legs instead of the table, because Nintendo themselves did say that that was something you could do. Now, it is worth noting, this is a game that needs you to have quite a lot of room for you to do it. You can see the size table they gave us for the demo. You really end up extending your arms the entire way out. The Joy-Cons could also pick up a lot of movement, not just on the table, but when you went to shoot, you'd have to lift the Joy-Con up and make a shooting-like motion. And even when you didn't have the ball in your hands, you could still wave your arms around because the Joy-Cons would pick that up. As much fun as the one game we got to play was, this does seem like a good way to speedrun your way to carpal tunnel. I'm not even exaggerating when I say my arms still hurt from yesterday from playing it. Now, they did have a couple of indie games for us to play as well. I was super sad that there wasn't any Rune Factory or Story of Seasons, and because I was running out of time, I only got to play a couple of them, but I wound up playing Split Fiction and Hades 2. Both of these ran absolutely incredibly. Now, the last time I played Split Fiction, I was playing it on the Xbox Series X, and it's actually wild to me how good this looked on the Switch 2 as well. And if you're someone who's yet to have picked this up on any other console or PC, you're going to have a great time experiencing this on the Switch too. Hades 2 not only looked great, but also performed fantastically. One thing that will be interesting to see though is because this is releasing on the Switch as well as the Switch 2, is if there's actually any difference. But hopefully they're going to give us a release date sometime soon for this, because this was a great game to play. They also had a station set up for you to play the GameCube games. Now, the way these games looked on the Switch 2 is literally how I remember them. That is how strong nostalgia is. Even though I know for a fact that these look and play way better than they did on the GameCube. I will say though, the GameCube controller is incredibly light. I would by no means say this is a must buy given its price. You can play these games perfectly fine with whatever controllers you have, but the fact that it is wireless is pretty nice. They unfortunately weren't showing the entire catalogue of GameCube games that we could play, so sadly there was no Pokemon Colosseum, which is one of the games I am the most excited for, but I was able to play a little bit of Wind Waker, which is another game I'm very excited to finally get to play, as even though I had a GameCube and a Wii U, I missed both of these versions. And even though I wouldn't really call myself a retro gamer, this is something I can see myself playing. They've really done a great job to not only bring it over to the Switch 2, but also do some fine tuning to make it look pretty great too. I am, however, still salty that they haven't given us a remake of Wind Waker HD, and instead they gave us this. I'm also crossing my fingers that they bring us the original Animal Crossing, as that for me would make it well worthwhile to upgrade my online membership. And right at the end, we also got a glance at some of the accessories that Nintendo offer, although I'm probably going to be looking at third-party ones to make my Switch look a little bit nicer, as I still can't believe they already came out with a black version and nothing else. Overall, I was absolutely blown away by my experience with the Switch 2. Everything about the console just felt a little bit more premium. and this truly feels graphically like a huge upgrade from the Nintendo Switch, both in handheld and when it's docked. I think it is important to also mention the price at this point. This is an expensive console. And whilst I would have loved to have seen this and the games a little bit cheaper, this is truly everything I've been asking for in a successor to the Switch. But as incredible as the Switch 2 is, I think everything I said in my last video still stands. Whether this is a day one purchase for you completely depends on how many of the games actually interest you, as there's still so much about the Switch 2 we don't know. Like, one huge thing I really want to know is whether games that run badly on the Switch are going to run great on the Switch 2, or whether there's going to be no change whatsoever. But seeing as I've already pre-ordered the Switch 2, I am just counting down the days until it finally launches, because this is going to be an absolutely fantastic console.